In today's Zoom interview session, we have Suzanne Fournier. She's the Executive Director of the National Farmers Union in New Brunswick. Today, we talk about the province proposal on potash exploration, and she's going to talk about how it's going to have a major impact, not just on the environment, but also on people and the province. Here's what she has to say. Can you tell us about your organization?
Sure. The National Farmers Union in New Brunswick represents about 200 farming members. We are one of two accredited farm organizations in the province. The National Farmers Union as an organization nationally has existed in Canada for over 50 years.
Mhm. Why is the National Farmers Union in New Brunswick concerned about a request for proposals for potash exploration?
So we have three major concerns. The first is that the exploration and potential resource extraction would take place on unceded and unsurrendered Indigenous territory, which the NFU believes that Indigenous people should have stewardship over.
Mhm.
Our primary concern for farmers is the issue around water. We know that the last potash mine extracted around 11 million liters of water per day from the Penobscot aquifer. And given the drought that we had in 2020, farmers are really concerned about water management and having enough water for their crops. So we don't want to see water lost for farmland and for farms to a mining operation. We also know that exploration itself for an RFP or for any resource can have significant damage to farmers and farmland, even before heavy equipment goes on site. So for example, someone doing exploration could drive their vehicle, which is not considered heavy equipment, through a blueberry field, which would be incredibly damaging. They could leave a gate open and let livestock out. There are lots of, potential harms there. And then the other piece that we're really concerned about is just losing more productive agricultural land to something like resource extraction. Currently, we're losing a lot of productive land to suburban sprawl, and farmers are then forced to clear forested or other land in order to, keep up their farm production.
Mhm. How will the potash exploration impact the Salt Springs and Cassidy Lakes areas?
So the exploration itself, as I mentioned, could have some damage to farms as it goes forward. If it's accepted, and if there is a mining operation accepted to go forward, it would depend on the type of mine. We don't know yet what that could be. There are a couple options. So it would really depend on that. We know from the last mine, the last potash mine, in conjunction with other mining that's going on in that area, mainly shale gas, that people in the local communities lost water for their homes. They had subsistence of their properties, so displacement of both buildings and land. I spoke to a farmer who had farmland that was affected by the last potash mine, and I asked her whether 10, 15 years later, some of the land that was affected, whether they could use it now or not. And they said no. It's still unfarmable due to the mining activity that had happened in 2010 or 12.
Mhm.
The National Farmers Union is really pushing for input reduction across all inputs. So inputs, agricultural inputs are fertilizer, are synthetic pesticides, herbicides, other chemicals. We see input use as directly related to the climate crisis. And the climate crisis is directly related to the farm income crisis.
Mhm.
Um, farmers in New Brunswick, I think in 2018 was the last analysis we did, only keep 7% of every dollar they make. In PEI, it's 4%. So by reducing the inputs that you use, by reducing the fertilizer that you use, the less or the more money that you get to keep at the end of the day as a farmer. But then it also benefits the climate by using less. So even if there were readily available potash and reasonably priced for our New Brunswick farmers, we would still be suggesting looking at alternatives other than this kind of resource.
Apart from climate crisis, what are the key environmental impacts the province will have if this proposal goes ahead?
As I mentioned, water is going to be one of the biggest ones. We know that sound and biodiversity will be incredibly impacted if there is more mining operations in that area. As I mentioned, there already are some. We're unsure of air impacts, but it is likely that there would be some air pollution associated with the mine. So we know that the last mine, an amount, we don't know how much because a lot of that data is not collected or available. Brackish water gets into the Bay of Fundy, which can have cumulative effects on that ecosystem as well. And I know from the last mine, the local community in Penobscot had concerns over whether, the wastewater was treated properly and was safe to consume. Those were never really addressed. They had other, health concerns, again, around air and noise pollution. So I think, you're looking at a multitude of environmental impacts, and we don't even know probably how much at this point, what that would be.
What do you think the government should be doing instead of going ahead with this proposal that could, like you said, impact not just farmers but even the province and maybe like other provinces next to New Brunswick?
Yeah. We've asked the government to reconsider and explore alternatives to resource extraction. We know this government seems particularly keen on mining and resource extraction. The National Farmers Union feels that it's incredibly important to recognize that we are at the limits of what we can do extracting resources from our land, and that's everywhere, but particularly in New Brunswick. We're going to, if we don't stop, see devastation, and no economic activity can happen when we have, destroyed our entire ecosystem or biosphere. So, we know that the province is looking for obviously industry and, economic viability in New Brunswick. We would love to see more small farms. Let's reinvest our money in, growing our small farms, because it's incredibly hard for new entrants and for young farmers to get started. Land, has become incredibly expensive in the last couple of years. And as I mentioned, more people are trying to build houses on productive agricultural land rather than farm it. So that also prices them out of the equation. I think the other thing that the Farmers Union would be interested in is more green energy. I think there's a real opportunity for economic activity around that. And the province has not taken advantage of it.
If the government goes ahead with this proposal, what plans does your organization have to counter the move?
Great question. I don't know. We have regular meetings with the Assistant Deputy Minister of Agriculture. I have one this afternoon. It's on my list to talk about. We would explore the government channels first. Because we are an accredited organization, have good standing, with the government departments, and have, with Bill 75, requested meetings with the Department of Agriculture and Energy and Resources to discuss our concerns. I think that would probably be our first step. If the mine does go forward, I'm not sure. We would certainly be calling on our members and other farmers to organize and really make their voices clear, come together on why this would be incredibly harmful to their, to their livelihoods.
Right. Is there any alternative to potash exploration, that could not only benefit the farmers, but also the government and people of New Brunswick?
I mean, in terms of potassium, there are other ways to get potassium into the fields if you're looking at an alternative to potash specifically. There does seem to be some evidence over time that potash can actually damage the soil or create a reliance on that fertilizer. So, I mean, there are, there are lots of non-synthetic and, non-industrial potassium additives that farmers could be exploring and using. For the province, I mean, it really comes down to, I think we're asking for reducing resource extraction. There is no alternative to cutting down all of our trees or taking out all of the potash, taking out all of the shale gas. As I mentioned, I think there are other opportunities for the government to explore economically viable industries that aren't going to have that long-term impact. And another really might be, if we get to a point where we can give Indigenous people the stewardship, they may have ideas and suggestions that we haven't thought of for, a strong New Brunswick economy that doesn't remove our resources.
Thank you so much for the interview.
Anytime. Yep.
For the NB Media Co-op, this is Arun Budathoki.